Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive into something truly uncomfortable. We're going to explore the brutal reality of ancient torture devices. Now, before you picture some Hollywood movie scene, I want you to understand that the truth was far more visceral, far more insidious, and often far more mundane in its horror. We're talking about an era when the line between justice and barbaric spectacle was blurrier than an old, forgotten scroll. You might think you're tough, that you could endure anything. But trust me, after tonight, you'll probably be thanking your lucky stars for your ergonomic desk chair and fuzzy slippers. The sheer ingenuity of human cruelty, when applied to methods of extracting confessions or simply inflicting maximum pain, is frankly astounding. And let's be real, you probably wouldn't have survived 5 minutes in one of these historical scenarios. Not even close. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on cobblestone, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something vaguely metallic. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoes through the narrow alleyways, a sound that, in this context, feels less like industry and more like an ominous countdown. You're not in a museum, not in a historical reenactment. You're there. Your modern sensibilities, your understanding of human rights and due process, are utterly irrelevant here. Here, justice is swift, often brutal, and frequently public. The very concept of fair trial as you know it is a whisper. Barely audible over the cries of the condemned, you feel a chill. Not just from the cool night air, but from the unsettling understanding that you are an outsider in a time where pain was currency, and fear was the most effective form of social control. This isn't just about punishment, it's about spectacle. It's about sending a message. And that message is crystal clear dissent, deviance, or even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time can lead you down a path from which there is no return. Consider the early forms of interrogation. Before the elaborate contraptions we'll discuss later, there was often just brute force, the weight of a heavy hand, or the relentless chill of a dungeon. Imagine being dragged into a dank stone room, the only light flickering from a torch held by a cloaked figure whose face remains perpetually in shadow. The air is cold, heavy with the smell of mildew and fear. You try to speak, but your voice catches in your throat. Your captors aren't interested in your protest of innocence. They're interested in a confession. Any confession? The simplest device could be a rough rope, tightly bound, or perhaps just the threat of what was to come. Whispered in the darkness, one of the earliest and most widespread forms of torture was simply starvation and thirst, you might think. That's not a device, but consider the deliberate, calculated nature of it. You're locked away, perhaps in a cage just large enough to stand or crouch, with no food, no water. Days bleed into nights. Your throat becomes raw, your lips cracked, your stomach clenches with agonizing spasms. Your mind, once sharp, begins to fog, plagued by vivid hallucinations of cool water and lavish feasts. This isn't quick, it's a slow, agonizing descent into madness and despair. The body, deprived of its most basic needs, begins to consume itself. Muscles waste away. Organs begin to fail. The psychological torment is immense, knowing that relief is just a mouthful away, yet utterly unattainable. Historians still debate whether the intent of such methods was purely punitive or often a deliberate attempt to induce delirium and false confessions. The outcome, regardless of intent, was invariably the same utter collapse, Then there was the stock and the pillory. Devices that seem almost benign in comparison to what's to come, yet were potent tools of public humiliation and exposure. You find yourself standing in the town square, your neck and wrists clamped into wooden boards. Perhaps your feet as well. You're utterly helpless, exposed to the elements and the jeering crowds. Imagine the sun beating down, or chilling rain soaking through your clothes. Your limbs ache, cramped in unnatural positions. Passers-by throw refuse, rotten vegetables, even stones. Children point and laugh. This wasn't designed to break bones, but to break the spirit, to strip you of dignity, to make you an object of scorn and ridicule. It was a potent form of social ostracization, often followed by more severe punishments. You might think, I could handle a little public shaming. But the relentless barrage of insults, the physical discomfort, and the utter powerlessness would chip away at your resolve. Leaving you raw and vulnerable, consider the story. Perhaps apocryphal, but chilling nonetheless. Of a baker in medieval France, he was caught selling bread that was underweight. A serious offense in a time when food was precious, instead of a more violent punishment. He was sentenced to the pillory of the baker. This wasn't just any pillory. It was set up directly in front of his own bakery, forcing him to witness his business, his livelihood, being ruined by his own folly. And for good measure. The townspeople were encouraged to throw rotten dough at him. A small detail, perhaps, but one that highlights the insidious nature of public shaming. It wasn't about the physical pain, but the utter destruction of one's reputation and livelihood. You also encounter the earliest forms of strappado, not the full, elaborate contraption yet, but the simple act of suspension. Your wrists are bound tightly behind your back, and you're hoisted up by a rope, your entire body weight hanging from your shoulders. The pain starts almost immediately, a searing agony in your joints as your arms are wrenched from their sockets. Your breathing becomes shallow, ragged. Every muscle screams in protest. This method was effective because it caused immense, immediate pain without necessarily causing permanent damage, at least not at first. It was a quick way to encourage a confession, or at least a desperate plea for mercy. The longer you hang, the more your shoulders dislocate, your ligaments tear. It's a slow, excruciating process of internal destruction, all while you dangle helplessly, your feet barely brushing the ground, or perhaps not at all. One little-known fact about these early forms of suspension is their widespread use across different cultures, from ancient China to the Roman Empire. The simple act of hanging a person by their bound wrists was a remarkably common and effective torture. It required no complex machinery, just a sturdy beam and a length of rope. This universality speaks to the fundamental understanding of human anatomy and how to exploit its weaknesses for maximum pain. It's a chilling reminder that cruelty is a human constant, adaptable to any time or place. As you stand there, observing these initial glimpses into ancient torment, you begin to grasp the cold, hard reality. These weren't isolated incidents or the acts of a few deranged individuals. This was often institutionalized, part of the legal and social fabric of the time. The line between punishment and torture was often blurred, and the definition of justice was far removed from modern sensibilities. You start to feel the oppressive weight of history, the silent screams that echo through these forgotten spaces. You continue your unsettling journey, moving from the crude, fundamental cruelties to something more designed. The air grows heavier, the chill deeper, as you approach structures that were specifically crafted to inflict maximum suffering. This isn't about improvised pain anymore, it's about engineering agony. You feel a prickle on your skin, a phantom sensation of confinement. As you approach the whispered legend of the Iron Maiden, imagine standing before it, a tall, upright sarcophagus, ostensibly made of wood or iron, its exterior perhaps even carved with a misleadingly benevolent figure. But as you draw closer, you see the hinges, the faint line where it opens, and you know instinctively what lies within. This isn't just a container, it's a living tomb. The very thought of being sealed inside, in utter darkness with no room to move, is enough to trigger a primal fear of claustrophobia. Your heart begins to pound a little faster. The Iron Maiden is, for many, the quintessential medieval torture device. Its image is seared into the collective consciousness, a symbol of brutal, inescapable torment. But here's a fascinating and somewhat uncomfortable truth: the existence and widespread use of the classic Iron Maiden, as depicted in popular culture, is a subject of considerable historical debate. Many historians believe the most famous examples, like the Nuremberg Iron Maiden, were actually concocted in the 19th century as sensationalist exhibits to satisfy a public fascination with medieval barbarism. Rather than being genuine tools of torture from the Middle Ages, the concept, however, of being confined in a spiked box did exist in various forms. For instance, similar devices, though less elaborate, were mentioned in earlier historical accounts, sometimes as a form of capital punishment where a victim was simply enclosed in a tight space until they suffocated or starved. This academic debate, a classic example of historians still debate whether the Iron Maiden was truly a widespread medieval torture device or a later sensationalized invention, doesn't diminish the chilling psychological impact of the idea. Regardless of its exact historical prevalence, the fear it invokes is very, very real. Yet, even if the classic Iron Maiden was an invention, the spirit of it, the concept of forced, agonizing confinement, was very much alive. You can see its philosophical cousins in devices like the Scold's Bridle, though that was more about public humiliation and silencing. Here, the confinement is meant to inflict pain. Think of the barrel stocks or drunkard's cloak. You might be forced into a barrel, head and arms sticking out of holes, unable to sit or lie down comfortably, then rolled through the streets. Or perhaps you're encased in a heavy wooden cloak, a mobile stock, forcing you to carry your shame and discomfort through the town, while not the spiked terror of the Iron Maiden. These devices still played on the themes of physical restriction and public exposure, designed to break not just the body, but the will. Now, let's step into a more definitively brutal form of confinement, the Spanish tickler or cat's paw. You're not being closed into a box here, but you are being held firm, usually naked, while a torturer uses a tool that resembles an animal's claw, often with multiple sharp, curved prongs. This isn't about penetration, but about tearing. Imagine rough metal claws dragging across your bare skin, shredding and ripping flesh, particularly on the back, chest, or limbs. Each pull of the device is designed to flay strips of skin, creating intensely painful lacerations without immediately causing fatal wounds. The objective is to maximize pain and disfigurement, leading to profuse bleeding and agonizing discomfort. You can almost feel the phantom tearing, the raw, exposed nerves screaming in protest, the sound of metal scraping against skin, even in your imagination, is enough to make you wince. This brings us to the lead sprinkler. Again, the concept is simple, but the application is horrifying. You're held down, perhaps by bonds, perhaps by sheer force. The torturer holds a hollow, metal ball, often shaped like a human head or a sphere, filled with molten lead, tar, or even boiling water. There are small holes in the sphere. When shaken, the molten substance sprinkles out, not in a stream, but in hot, searing droplets. Imagine those drops landing on your skin, sizzling and burning. The pain would be instantaneous and intense, each droplet creating a blister, then an open wound. The slow, deliberate application, the methodical sprinkling, would prolong the agony, maximizing the psychological terror as you anticipate each new burning impact. This device was particularly insidious because it didn't kill immediately but inflicted agonizing, widespread burns, leading to infections and a slow, painful death if not attended to. It highlights a common theme in ancient torture, the focus on prolonging suffering rather than a swift end. You're beginning to understand that the brutal reality isn't always about complex machinery. Sometimes, it's about the ingenious application of simple physics and common materials to inflict maximum agony. The lack of antiseptic, the prevalence of infection, meant that even relatively minor injuries inflicted by these devices often became death sentences. Prolonged and agonizing, you can almost smell the acrid scent of burning flesh, the coppery tang of blood in the air. Your stomach churns. Consider a lesser-known but equally horrifying device, the thumb screw or finger screw. It seems deceptively simple. Your fingers or thumbs are placed between two metal plates, and a screw is slowly tightened. At first, it's just pressure. Uncomfortable but manageable. But as the screw turns, the pressure intensifies, crushing the bones, pulpifying the flesh. The pain escalates beyond imagination, a dull ache turning into a blinding, throbbing agony. You hear the faint, sickening crunch of bone. Feel the excruciating pressure on your nails. This device was particularly effective for extracting confessions, as the pain was immense but rarely fatal, allowing for repeated application. It's a classic example of focusing on extremities to inflict severe pain without immediately incapacitating the victim. The agonizing slowness of the process, the control the torturer had over the pace of your agony, made it incredibly effective in breaking resistance. Another variation on this theme of localized. Crushing pain was the shin crusher, or boot. Not a comfortable boot, mind you. This was a metal or wooden device, often lined with spikes or ridges, into which your leg, specifically your shin, was placed. Then, screws or wedges were slowly tightened, pressing against the bone. Imagine the slow, grinding pressure on your tibia and fibula, two relatively vulnerable bones. The pain would be immense. A deep, bruising ache that quickly escalated into a bone-shattering agony. Similar to the thumb screw, this device aimed to inflict extreme pain without immediately killing, allowing for prolonged interrogation. The very idea of your bones being systematically crushed, the sound of splintering and cracking, is enough to send shivers down your spine. One of the more unsettling aspects of these devices, from the theoretical Iron Maiden to the very real thumb screw, is their very public nature in many cases. Justice, or what passed for it, was often a public spectacle. The screams, the pleas, the sight of suffering, it was all part of the deterrent. You weren't just being punished, you were being made an example of. Imagine the sheer terror of knowing that your agony was serving as entertainment, or at least a stark warning. For a crowd of onlookers, this adds another layer to the psychological torment, stripping away any last vestige of privacy or dignity. The historical evidence suggests that public executions and tortures were commonplace, a stark reminder of the power of the state or ruling authority. This pervasive public element is a crucial detail, often overlooked when we consider these devices in isolation. The psychological impact of being humiliated and brutalized in front of an unfeeling crowd is almost as potent as the physical pain itself. The sheer variety of these devices, each designed to exploit a different vulnerability, speaks to a dark inventiveness, from the subtle psychological terror of slow starvation to the crushing agony of a thumb screw. Each method was a testament to humanity's capacity for cruelty, and the chilling part is, these were just the beginning. The architects of ancient torment had many more innovations to unleash upon the human body and mind. You're deep within the chilling narrative now. the whispers of history pressing in. From the confines of crushing devices, you are now drawn towards a more insidious form of torment, one that preys not just on the body, but on the primal fear of suffocation and slow, agonizing psychological breakdown. This is the realm where water, life-giving and essential, becomes an instrument of absolute terror. The air around you feels heavy, damp, with a faint, cloying smell that is vaguely reminiscent of old, stagnant water. You hear a dripping sound, rhythmic and relentless, echoing in the imaginary chamber. This isn't a quick death, it's a meticulously slow unraveling, designed to push the victim to the very brink of sanity, forcing them to confront their own mortality in the most drawn-out way possible. One of the most infamous and widespread methods was the water torture, or waterboarding. While the term waterboarding is largely associated with modern interrogation techniques, its roots stretch back centuries. Imagine being restrained, perhaps tied to a plank or a table. Your head positioned lower than your feet. A cloth is placed over your face, typically over your nose and mouth. Then, slowly, methodically, water is poured over the cloth. It's not a flood, it's a steady, insistent stream. You gasp, trying to draw breath, but the water saturates the cloth, creating an immediate, overwhelming sensation of drowning. Your body convulses, your lungs burn. Desperate for air, you thrash. But the restraints hold you fast. The terror is absolute, primal. The genius, if you can call it that, of water torture is its ability to simulate drowning without actually causing immediate death. The water enters your nasal passages and throat, triggering your gag reflex, making you feel as though your lungs are filling with water. Your brain screams for oxygen, but your airways are blocked. This can be repeated over and over, bringing you to the edge of unconsciousness, then pulling you back. It's a relentless cycle of terror and near death, designed to break your will, to force you to confess to anything, simply to make it stop. You might find yourself agreeing to the most outlandish accusations just for a moment's reprieve. A single breath. The psychological trauma is profound, leaving an indelible mark long after the physical ordeal ends. Historians still debate the specific origins of this technique, but its effectiveness in eliciting confessions or simply inflicting terror is undeniable. Spanning from ancient China to the Spanish Inquisition, then there was the water cure, which sounds deceptively benign, almost medicinal, doesn't it? But the reality was anything but. You might be forced to ingest an enormous quantity of water, sometimes gallons, far more than your stomach can hold. This would be done rapidly, often through a funnel. Your stomach would distend painfully, your internal organs under immense pressure. The feeling would be one of incredible bloating and agonizing cramps. Following this forced ingestion, the torturer might then jump on your distended stomach, or apply pressure with boards, forcing the water back out, often mixed with blood and bile. The internal damage would be severe, leading to ruptured organs, internal bleeding, and immense pain. It was a slow, agonizing process, sometimes used to force a confession, sometimes simply as a prolonged punishment. It's a particularly gruesome example of how something as simple as water could be turned into a weapon of internal destruction. A lesser-known, yet equally horrifying method involved cold water immersion. You might be stripped naked and thrown into a pit of icy water, or chained in a dungeon where freezing water slowly, steadily rose around you. This wasn't about drowning, but about hypothermia. The initial shock would be excruciating, your body convulsing uncontrollably. The cold would seep into your bones, numbing your extremities, then spreading inward. Your muscles would cramp. Your breathing becomes shallow and erratic. As your core body temperature dropped, your mind would begin to cloud. Hallucinations might set in. And eventually, you would drift into unconsciousness, then death. The slow, creeping onset of hypothermia, combined with the psychological despair of being unable to escape the icy grip of the water, made this an incredibly effective and terrifying method of execution or torture, the sheer, relentless nature of the cold, seeping into every part of your being, would break down resistance far more effectively than any direct blow. You begin to notice a pattern with these water-based tortures. They often involve a slow, inexorable process. They don't typically aim for immediate death, but rather a drawn-out battle against one's own body and mind, a struggle against primal instincts. The very element that sustains life is twisted into an instrument of prolonged suffering. It's a particularly cruel irony. Consider the example of the Pear of Anguish. Though its connection to water is more metaphorical, while often depicted as a device of internal expansion used for orifices, some historical texts suggest variations where fluids might have been forced into a victim's body before the expansion, or where the pear was heated, causing immense internal burning and pressure when inserted. The common thread here, with water torture, is the manipulation of internal pressure and the body's natural functions to inflict pain. While widely debated as a genuine medieval torture device versus a later invention, the concept of internal distension and rupture, mirroring the effects of forced water ingestion, speaks to a dark inventiveness. The overall feeling you get from these water tortures is one of relentless inevitability. You can fight against blows. You can try to resist physical restraints. But how do you fight against the very air you breathe, or the water your body desperately needs? The psychological impact of having these essential elements turned against you is perhaps even more terrifying than the physical pain. Your mind, starved of oxygen or overwhelmed by internal pressure, would betray you, offering up any information, true or false, to make the torment cease. The chilling realization is that your own biology becomes your enemy, manipulated by your tormentors. The helplessness is absolute. The damp chill of the water tortures recedes, replaced now by an oppressive dry heat, the smell of ash and something acrid stinging your nostrils. You're entering a domain where the element of fire, primordial and terrifying, becomes the ultimate tool of agony. This isn't the swift, cleansing flame of execution. It's the slow, deliberate charring. The searing pain designed to break the body and the spirit through prolonged immolation. You feel an almost primal fear ripple through you, a deep-seated instinct to recoil from the intense heat that seems to emanate from the very air itself. The flickering light dances on unseen walls, casting long, grotesque shadows that seem to writhe with imagined pain. This is a realm where the screams of the condemned once echoed, muffled by the crackle of burning wood and flesh, one of the most horrific, yet conceptually simple. Applications of fire was burning at the stake, while often associated with execution for heresy or witchcraft. The process itself was an agonizing form of torture before death. Imagine being bound to a large wooden stake, often with bundles of faggot sticks piled around your feet. The fire would be lit, not as a roaring inferno designed for a quick end, but often with damp wood or insufficient kindling to ensure a prolonged, torturous burn. The heat would build slowly, first blistering your skin, then charring it. You would feel your clothes smolder, then ignite. The pain would be unimaginable, searing through every nerve ending as your flesh cooked. Your muscles contracted, and your internal organs began to fail. The smoke, thick and choking, would fill your lungs, adding to the torment. Death would be a slow, suffocating descent into unconsciousness, preceded by indescribable agony. This was not just punishment, it was a public spectacle, a terrifying warning meant to instill fear and enforce conformity. Historians still debate the precise methods of lighting and construction, but the intent was always clear: a horrifying public display of power, a more localized yet equally agonizing. Fire torture was the brazier or hot coals. Imagine your bare feet, or perhaps your hands, being forced onto a bed of glowing, red-hot coals. The immediate sensation would be one of unbearable heat, followed by the sickening smell of burning flesh. Your skin would blister instantly, then char, the fat beneath melting, and the muscles contracting. The pain would be excruciating, a deep, persistent burn that wouldn't subside. This method was particularly effective for extracting confessions because it caused immense pain without necessarily being immediately fatal. Allowing for prolonged interrogation, the torturer could control the intensity and duration of the burn, threatening to apply more pressure or keep the victim on the coals longer until they broke. You can almost hear the sizzle, the muffled cries, the sickening smell of burning hair and skin. It's a sensory assault, even in your imagination, designed to make you recoil. Then there was the burning torch, or taper. This wasn't about setting an entire body ablaze, but about the slow, deliberate application of focused heat. Imagine a torturer holding a lit torch or a burning taper, bringing the flame ever closer to your sensitive areas, your fingertips, your eyelids, your armpits, or even your genitals. The intense heat would cause excruciating localized burns, blistering and charring the skin. The control over the flame allowed the torturer to prolong the pain, to bring the flame close, then pull it away, only to return it again, playing a psychological game of terror and relief. The constant threat of immediate, searing pain, combined with the anticipation, would be enough to shatter even the strongest will. This method was often used in conjunction with other interrogations. A hot complement to cold questions, a lesser known, yet equally horrifying method was the red-hot iron. This could be a branding iron, an iron bar, or even individual pieces of metal heated until they glowed red. Imagine this incandescent metal being pressed against your flesh. The instant it touched, your skin would vaporize, sizzling and smoking, leaving a deep, cauterized wound. The pain would be beyond anything imaginable. A searing, agonizing inferno localized to that single spot, but radiating throughout your entire body. This was often used for branding criminals, marking them permanently, but also as a form of torture to extract information, or simply to inflict extreme pain. The sound of flesh burning, the smell of charred meat would fill the air, sickening and unforgettable. Sickening. One particular detail that often gets overlooked is the psychological effect of the smell of burning flesh. It's a scent deeply ingrained in our primal fears, associated with destruction and pain, being forced to endure that smell, knowing it is your own flesh, or that of someone nearby, would add another layer of psychological horror to the already unbearable physical pain. The sheer, visceral reality of it is often glossed over in historical accounts, but it was undoubtedly a potent weapon in the torturer's arsenal. The strategic application of heat, the methodical charring, and the psychological impact of fire demonstrate a profound understanding of human vulnerability. These methods were not about quick death, but about prolonged, agonizing suffering designed to break the victim completely. The ancient world, in its pursuit of confessions or its desire for public retribution, mastered the art of using fire to inflict maximum, drawn-out torment. The very element that provides warmth and light was twisted into a tool of absolute despair. You're moving deeper into the shadows of ancient cruelty, leaving behind the searing embrace of fire for something even more, fundamentally dislocating the systematic stretching and dismemberment of the human body. This isn't about mere pain anymore, it's about the deliberate tearing apart of joints, the agonizing elongation of limbs, pushing the human frame beyond its natural limits until it shatters. The air around you seems to crackle with an imagined tension, a phantom stretching sensation that makes your own muscles twitch in sympathy. You can almost hear the low groans of wood under immense strain, the sickening pop of dislocated joints, and the ragged screams of those enduring what no body was ever designed to withstand. This is where the torturer truly becomes an engineer of agony, meticulously calculating the breaking point, one of the most iconic and truly horrifying devices in this category is the rack. You've heard the name, but to truly comprehend it, you must visualize yourself upon it. Imagine lying flat on a sturdy wooden frame, your wrists securely fastened to one roller at one end, and your ankles equally bound to another roller at the opposite end. Then, slowly, inexorably, the rollers begin to turn in opposite directions. At first, it's just a stretch, uncomfortable but tolerable, but with each turn, the tension increases, your joints begin to pull apart, your shoulders scream as they dislocate, followed by your hips and knees. Your spine elongates, the vertebrae separating. Tearing muscles and ligaments, the pain is beyond comprehension, a simultaneous agony throughout your entire body. Every muscle is taut, every joint screaming in protest. You feel your limbs stretching, lengthening, as if they are made of elastic, only to realize they are tearing. The objective isn't always to dismember, though that was a common outcome, especially with continued application. The goal is to induce such excruciating pain that resistance crumbles, and the victim confesses to anything, real or imagined, just for the torture to cease. The slow, methodical pace of the turning rollers makes it even more terrifying. You can feel every increment of torment, anticipating the next sickening pop or tear. Historians still debate the optimal construction of the medieval rack, whether it was designed for maximum dislocation or simply extreme stretching. Regardless, its effectiveness was undisputed, making it one of the most feared interrogation devices. Then there was the strappado. Distinct from the simple suspension mentioned earlier. Here, your hands are tied behind your back, often tightly bound at the wrists. A rope is then attached, and you are hoisted into the air, sometimes high above the ground. The initial shock of your body weight pulling against your shoulders is agonizing as they dislocate, but the true horror of the strappado lies in the subsequent drops. The torturer might suddenly release the rope, letting you plummet several feet before catching you with a jarring jerk. The impact would send a shockwave of pain through your already dislocated shoulders, often tearing ligaments and muscles, sometimes even ripping arms clean from their sockets. This wasn't just about suspension, it was about the repeated, violent shocks to the dislocated joints, designed to cause maximum agony and internal damage. You can almost feel the stomach lurching drop, the searing pain of the sudden stop, over and over again, a lesser known, but equally brutal method involved forced limb separation through less direct means. Imagine being tied to separate horses, or even to two strong branches bent apart, which were then released. The sheer force would tear your body apart, while less common for interrogation. This method was reserved for extreme capital punishment, designed to inflict the most horrific public death imaginable. The very idea of your body being pulled in opposing directions, feeling every fiber of muscle and bone straining and tearing, is enough to make your mind recoil. This extreme form of torture speaks to the absolute dehumanization of the victim, reducing them to mere material to be torn asunder. Consider also the various forms of crushing devices that, while not explicitly stretching, achieved similar goals of dismemberment through intense, localized pressure. We touched upon the thumbscrew and shin crusher. But imagine larger variations, designed to crush entire limbs or even the skull. These weren't about slow pulls, but about immense, inexorable pressure, pulverizing bone and muscle until there was nothing left but mangled flesh. The sound would be particularly gruesome, the splintering of bone, the wet crunch of tissue. It's a sickening thought that such devices could be conceived and implemented, One morbid detail that sometimes emerges from historical accounts is the particular attention paid to the sound of these tortures. The screams, yes, but also the more subtle sounds: the creak of the rack, the pop of a joint, the wet tear of muscle. These sounds were as much a part of the deterrent as the visual spectacle. They were auditory warnings, etched into the collective memory of the populace. This common historical fact often escapes the general narrative of these devices, but it adds another layer to their chilling effectiveness. The deliberate orchestration of sounds of suffering, whether public or private, served to amplify the terror. You realize that these devices were not just tools, they were statements. They were designed to demonstrate absolute power, to break the human body in ways that were both agonizing and visually shocking. The sheer ingenuity applied to the art of dislocating and tearing, of extending and shattering, speaks to a dark chapter in human history where the limits of cruelty were constantly being tested and redefined. Your own limbs feel strangely vulnerable, a phantom ache settling in your shoulders. The agonizing stretches and dislocations of the previous section still linger in your mind, a phantom ache in your joints. Now, you're about to confront the most infamous device in that agonizing lineage, the rack itself. Not just as a concept, but as a vivid, terrifying experience. You stand on the precipice of its mechanical cruelty, where every turn of a wheel means another degree of torment, another step towards total disintegration. The air in this imagined chamber is taut, heavy with unspoken dread. You can almost feel the cold. Unyielding wood beneath you, the rough grip of ropes around your wrists and ankles, the distant creak of turning gears, slow and deliberate, drills into your consciousness. This isn't chaos, it's calculated, methodical destruction. You are laid flat on the rack, a massive wooden frame, often several meters long and a meter wide, with rollers or a winch mechanism at one or both ends. Your ankles are securely fastened to one roller, your wrists to another. The straps are thick leather, chafing against your skin. The torturer, a silent, imposing figure, stands by the winch, his hand resting on the large wooden handle. You can feel the tension in your limbs even before he begins. Your heart pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs. He turns the wheel. The first sensation is a mild stretch, a pulling at your joints, like an over-enthusiastic yoga instructor. You might even exhale a shaky breath, thinking, this isn't so bad. But then he turns it again and again. The stretch becomes insistent, then painful. Your shoulders, already vulnerable from their natural range of motion, begin to protest. A deep ache sets in, radiating from your joint capsules. You want to squirm to relieve the pressure, but you are utterly immobile with each subsequent turn. The pain intensifies exponentially. Your muscles, now fully engaged in a futile battle against the stretching, begin to cramp and tear. You feel a sickening pop as your shoulders dislocate, the humeral head sliding out of the glenoid fossa. The pain is searing, blinding. Unlike anything you have ever experienced, it's not a single point of agony, but a widespread, burning, tearing sensation throughout your upper body. Your breath hitches, a strangled sound escaping your throat. You try to scream, but your voice is thin, reedy, overwhelmed by the internal clamor of your screaming nerves. But it doesn't stop there. The torturer continues to turn, slowly, methodically. Now it's your hips and knees that begin to protest, twisting, pulling, until they too dislocate with agonizing snaps. Your ligaments, stretched beyond their capacity, begin to tear. One by one, you feel your spine elongating, vertebrae separating, the cartilaginous disc compressing, then pulling apart. The pain in your back is immense, a tearing sensation running the entire length of your spine. Your height, a moment ago a fixed characteristic, now feels like a variable, stretching against your will. You are literally being pulled apart. The sounds you hear are not just your own cries. It's the creak of the wooden frame groaning under the immense pressure. It's the low, rhythmic turning of the winch. And most chillingly, it's the wet, sickening sounds of your own body coming undone. The pops of joints, the tearing of muscle fibers, the strained gasps of your breath. You might even feel a trickle of warmth as blood vessels rupture internally. The sheer, relentless nature of the rack is what makes it so terrifying. There is no escape, no quick release, only the agonizing, incremental process of your body being systematically destroyed. One historical fact that adds to the horror is that the rack was often used by the Spanish Inquisition. While the intent was to extract confessions, and the process was theoretically meant to stop before death, many victims died from the sustained trauma, either during the torture or from subsequent infections and internal injuries. The goal was to inflict enough pain to break the will, making the victim desperate to confess, often to crimes they didn't commit, just to make the agony cease. This common historical detail highlights the perverse logic behind such devices, a lesser known, yet related, form of torture was the breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel. While often used for execution, its prolonged nature meant it was also a form of torture. Imagine being tied to a large wooden wheel, your limbs stretched out and often secured over spokes. The executioner would then use a heavy club or an iron bar to systematically break your bones, one by one, often starting with the shin bones, then the thighs, arms, and finally the ribs and spine. Each blow would be a shattering agony, followed by the sickening crunch of bone. You wouldn't die quickly, you would linger, a mangled mess of broken limbs, often for hours or even days, before finally succumbing to shock, blood loss, or thirst. This wasn't stretching, but it was a deliberate, systematic dismemberment, a horrific symphony of breaking bones. The academic debate often centers on the degrees of pain and injury intended with the rake. Were torturers always aiming for dislocation? Or was the psychological terror of the stretch enough? Historians still debate whether the primary goal of the rack was outright dislocation or simply inducing extreme, unbearable pain through stretching. Regardless, the outcome for the victim was invariably catastrophic. Whether through confessed falsehoods or permanent physical damage, you are now profoundly aware of the fragility of the human body, how easily its intricate structure can be undone. The rack, in its brutal simplicity, embodies this terrifying truth. It is a monument to pain, a testament to humanity's capacity for calculated cruelty. Your own muscles feel weak, your joints oddly loose, a phantom echo of the torment you've just witnessed. You've witnessed the overt, agonizing destruction of the body, the spectacle of joints being torn asunder. Now, you step into a more insidious realm of ancient torment, where the devices are often less dramatic in appearance, yet inflict profound, often unseen, damage. This is the domain of subtle and savage arts, where pain is prolonged, psychological, and designed to leave no obvious marks, yet shatter the victim just as thoroughly. The air here feels colder, sharper, perhaps with the faint scent of rust and old wood, but without the immediate, visceral assault of fire or the metallic tang of blood. These tortures are often conducted in dimmer, more private settings, away from the public eye, where the slow, relentless application of pain can truly take its toll. The whispers you hear are not of screams, but of whimpers, of pleas, and the broken murmurs of a mind unraveling. Consider the rat torture. This horrifying method is not about complex machinery, but about exploiting primal fears and inflicting a particularly disgusting form of psychological and physical torment. Imagine a large, often hungry, rat placed on your bare stomach or chest. A heavy, often metal, bucket or cage is then inverted over the rat. trapping it against your skin. Heat is then applied to the top of the bucket, usually by hot coals or a torch. The rat, desperate to escape the intense heat, would instinctively try to burrow downwards, gnawing and scratching at your flesh to find a way out. The terror of feeling the rodent's teeth and claws tearing at your skin, slowly and painfully burrowing into your internal organs, would be immense. This wasn't necessarily a quick death, but a prolonged, agonizing, and incredibly repulsive form of torment, designed to break the victim through a combination of fear, pain, and psychological revulsion. The smell, the sounds, the sensation of gnawing, it's a truly sickening mental image. Then there was the sleep deprivation torture, a method that seems innocuous on the surface but is profoundly effective in shattering the human mind. You are simply kept awake, day after day, night after night. You might be stood, or chained in an uncomfortable position, perhaps subjected to constant noise, bright lights, or even subtle, irritating prods. Your body screams for rest, your eyes burn, your muscles ache, but every time your eyelids droop, every time your mind threatens to drift, you are jolted awake. After days, or even weeks, your cognitive functions begin to break down. Hallucinations set in, paranoia takes hold, your sense of reality becomes distorted. You can no longer think clearly, reason, or resist at this point. Even the most mundane questions can elicit confessions. Not because you're guilty, but because your mind is so utterly broken that you'll say anything, do anything, for just a moment of peace. Historians still debate the ethical implications of sleep deprivation as a non-physical torture, but its effectiveness in breaking individuals is undeniable, a lesser-known, yet equally insidious method involved the forced ingestion of noxious substances, not poisons designed to kill, but substances meant to induce extreme discomfort and internal distress. This could be incredibly salty water, large quantities of stale or putrid food, or even animal waste. The goal wasn't to kill quickly, but to cause agonizing stomach cramps, vomiting, diarrhea, and general internal malaise, often leading to severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. This internal suffering, combined with the humiliation and revulsion of forced ingestion, would be a potent tool for breaking a person's will. Imagine the sensation of your stomach churning, your body rebelling against the foul substances forced into it, hour after hour. You also find examples of sensory deprivation and overload. In some cases, victims would be placed in absolute darkness and silence for prolonged periods, leading to extreme disorientation, paranoia, and psychological breakdown. Conversely, others were subjected to constant, unbearable noise, the clanging bells, incessant drumming, or shrill whistles, driving them to the brink of madness. The idea here is to manipulate the very way your brain processes information, turning your own senses against you. Your mind, desperate for stimulation or relief from it, would begin to create its own reality, blurring the lines between sanity and insanity. One particularly disturbing detail of these subtle tortures is their psychological depth, unlike the obvious physical devices. These methods aim to dismantle the mind, leaving a victim psychologically devastated. Even if outwardly unharmed, the absence of visible wounds makes them even more terrifying, as the torment is hidden, internal, and often lingers long after the ordeal. This common truth about psychological torture often goes unmentioned in more sensationalized accounts, but it was a cruel reality, these less visually dramatic, but profoundly effective. Methods highlight a chilling truth about human cruelty. It doesn't always require elaborate machinery or overt violence. Sometimes, the most brutal forms of torture are those that prey on the mind, on basic human needs, and on the deepest, most primal fears, leaving the victim a shattered shell without a single mark on their skin. The shadows in this part of the historical journey seem deeper, the silence more unsettling. The chilling depths of psychological torment and hidden suffering begin to fade, only to be replaced by the raw, visceral terror of ancient methods that incorporated living creatures and sharp implements. You are now entering a particularly unsettling chapter, where the line between human and animal, and between tool and weapon, blurs in the pursuit of pain and punishment. The air around you feels charged, almost primal, with a faint, metallic tang that hints at spilled blood and the silent, watchful presence of creatures. You can almost hear the snarls, the snapping of jaws, and the cold glint of polished metal. This is where cruelty takes on a more predatory form, designed not just to inflict pain, but to maim and destroy. One of the most infamous and genuinely horrifying uses of animals in torture was the execution by beasts, or damnatio ad bestias. While primarily a form of capital punishment, the drawn-out nature of the spectacle often meant it was a prolonged, terrifying torture before death. Imagine being thrown into an arena, often naked and defenseless, facing starved lions, bears, wolves, or other wild animals. The crowd would roar, watching as the beasts, driven by hunger, slowly closed in. You would feel the immense fear, the desperate scramble for survival against an unstoppable, predatory force. The agony would be one of being mauled, torn apart limb by limb, suffering lacerations, crushing bites, and agonizing dismemberment. This was a public spectacle, designed to be both a deterrent and entertainment, a horrifying display of imperial power. The screams of the condemned, blending with the roars of the beasts and the cheers of the crowd, would create an unforgettable symphony of terror. Beyond the grand spectacle, animals were sometimes used in more confined, personal tortures. We touched upon the rat torture, but consider also the use of serpents or venomous insects, while less documented as widespread torture devices. There are accounts of victims being confined in pits or boxes with venomous snakes, scorpions, or spiders. The fear of being bitten, the agonizing pain of the venom, and the slow creep of paralysis or systemic failure would be an unbearable form of torment. This wasn't about quick death by poison, but about the agonizing fear and slow suffering inflicted by venom, sometimes allowing for prolonged interrogation. The psychological terror of being trapped with creatures whose bite could bring a slow, painful end is immense. Now, shift your focus to the sharp implements, the blades and tools designed to cut, pierce, and flay. One of the most brutal was the flaying, or the act of stripping a person's skin from their body. While often a form of execution, it was undoubtedly a prolonged torture. Imagine the initial cut, the sharp pain as the blade slices through your skin. Then, the slow, agonizing process of the torturer peeling back your flesh. Inch by agonizing inch, you would feel every rip, every tear. As your skin was separated from your muscles and organs, the pain would be beyond comprehension, the raw, exposed flesh screaming in protest. Blood would pour from your body, and the shock would eventually lead to death. But not before an unimaginable period of agony. The very thought of being stripped of your protective layer, exposed and vulnerable, is enough to make your skin crawl. Another horrific method involving blades was the impalement. This involved forcing a sharp stake, often blunted at the end, to prolong suffering, through a person's body. Imagine the agonizing sensation as the stake pierces your perineum and slowly, inexorably, pushes upwards through your internal organs, eventually emerging from your chest, shoulder, or mouth. You would be left to slowly die, hanging from the stake, your body pierced through. The internal damage would be immense, leading to massive bleeding, organ failure, and agonizing pain for hours, or even days, before death finally claimed you. This was not about quick death. It was about maximizing suffering and creating a terrifying public spectacle of prolonged agony. Historians still debate the specific variations of impalement across cultures and the intended time to death. But its brutal efficacy is clear, a more precise, yet equally terrifying. Use of sharp tools was mutilation. This could involve the deliberate cutting off of ears, noses, tongues, or fingers. While not always fatal, these acts caused immense pain, profuse bleeding, and permanent disfigurement. Imagine the blinding agony as a blade severs your ear, the gush of blood, and the subsequent throbbing pain. These acts were often performed as punishment for specific crimes, or as a prelude to further torture, designed to break the victim's spirit through disfigurement and public shame. The sound of flesh being cut, the sight of severed limbs, would be a gruesome reality for victims and observers alike. One particularly disturbing commonality in these brutal methods is the deliberate intent to dehumanize the victim, whether by casting them to beasts or systematically stripping them of their skin. The goal was to reduce them to something less than human, an object to be destroyed for public spectacle or private gratification. This common truth about ancient torture often goes unstated but underpins many of these brutal practices. You are left with a profound sense of the arbitrary nature of life and death in these ancient times, and the terrifying inventiveness applied to the act of ending or prolonging it through unimaginable suffering. The echoes of roars and the phantom gleam of blades seem to cling to the air around you. Having witnessed the raw brutality of beasts and blades, you now find yourself in the chilling, silent arena of the mind. This is where ancient torturers, with surprising foresight, understood that the most devastating pain isn't always physical. It's the torment that leaves no visible marks. The insidious psychological warfare designed to shatter sanity, break wills, and turn a person's inner world into a prison of their own making. The air here feels heavy, oppressive, not with the stench of blood or fire, but with the suffocating weight of despair and fear. You hear whispers, but they are not from others. They are the imagined voices of paranoia, the echoes of a mind slowly, meticulously unraveling. This is a realm where isolation, deceit, and constant threat become the most potent weapons. One of the most effective and widely used forms of psychological torment was isolation and solitary confinement. Imagine being thrown into a dank, lightless dungeon, a tiny cell where no sound penetrates, no light ever reaches. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into months. You lose all sense of time. Your only companions are your own thoughts, which, without external stimulation, soon become your tormentors. Paranoia sets in. You might start hearing phantom sounds, seeing fleeting shadows, or experiencing vivid hallucinations born from your own mind's desperate attempt to create stimuli. Your sense of self begins to erode. This wasn't about physical pain, but about stripping away your identity, your connection to reality, until you are a pliable, broken shell, desperate for any human contact or release. The human need for social interaction and sensory input is profound, and its prolonged deprivation can lead to severe psychological damage. Then there was the deliberate use of deception and false hope. You might be promised release, food, or a visit from loved ones, only for the promise to be cruelly snatched away at the last moment. Or you might be presented with false evidence, told that your friends have confessed and implicated you, or that your family is being tortured until you comply. This constant manipulation, the repeated crushing of hope, creates a profound sense of helplessness and betrayal. Your trust is systematically eroded, leaving you with no one to believe, not even yourself. The mental anguish of this psychological game can be as devastating as any physical blow, leaving a lasting scar in your psyche. A particularly insidious method involved threats against family or loved ones. This was a common and incredibly effective tactic. You might be shown a tool of torture and told it will be used on your child, your spouse, or your aging parents. Unless you confess, the torment of imagining your loved ones enduring unspeakable pain, knowing that your actions could spare them, is an unbearable burden. This preys on the deepest human bonds, turning love and loyalty into vulnerabilities. The threat might not even be real, but the belief that it is, the agonizing moral dilemma it presents, is enough to break even the most resilient individual. This method bypasses the individual's own capacity for pain and targets their emotional core, a truly savage form of psychological warfare. Consider also the constant humiliation and degradation, while often combined with physical tortures. These acts, even on their own, serve to strip victims of their dignity and self-worth. This could involve being stripped naked, forced into degrading positions, subjected to public ridicule, or forced to perform humiliating acts. The objective is to break down your sense of self, to make you feel worthless and utterly powerless. Once your dignity is gone, resistance often crumbles. The psychological scars of such degradation can be profound and long-lasting, far more damaging than any temporary physical pain. One little-known historical detail is the systematic study of human psychology by some ancient interrogators. While not psychologists in the modern sense, they understood the power of the mind and how to exploit its weaknesses. They recognized patterns in human behavior under duress and developed methods that were specifically designed to exploit those vulnerabilities. This common truth about the deliberate application of psychological pressure, even without formal theories, is often overlooked in popular narratives. The academic debate surrounding psychological torture often centers on its lasting effects. Historians and psychologists still debate the precise long-term neurological and emotional damage inflicted by prolonged psychological torture compared to physical torture. What is clear, however, is that the impact is profound and often irreversible, leaving victims with chronic anxiety, PTSD, and a shattered sense of reality. You are left with a profound understanding that the human mind, while capable of immense resilience, is also incredibly fragile when systematically attacked through isolation, deception, and the constant threat of harm to loved ones. It can break just as surely as bone or flesh. The shadows in this part of the journey are not just from the absence of light, but from the darkness of a mind driven to despair. You've traversed the harrowing landscape of ancient torment. From the crude confines of early devices to the systematic dismemberment of the rack, and the insidious unraveling of the mind? Now, as the final echoes of anguish begin to fade, you stand at a point of reflection, contemplating the lasting legacy of these brutal methods and their slow, yet inexorable retreat into the annals of history. The air around you feels different now, not entirely free of the lingering chill, but softened, less immediate in its dread. The phantom screams have quieted, replaced by a low hum, like a distant memory struggling to break through. You realize that while the physical presence of these devices has largely vanished, their shadows remain, a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for both immense cruelty and, ultimately, for progress. The brutal realities we've explored tonight didn't vanish overnight. They receded gradually, often replaced by more humane forms of punishment, or simply by increasingly sophisticated methods of legal inquiry. The Enlightenment, a period marked by a philosophical shift towards reason and individual rights, played a significant role in questioning the efficacy and morality of torture. Thinkers like Cesare Beccaria in the 18th century argued powerfully against torture, asserting that it was an unreliable means of obtaining truth, as innocent people would confess under duress, and that it was an affront to human dignity. His work on crimes and punishments became hugely influential, sparking reforms across Europe. This movement was a profound shift from an era where justice often meant public spectacle and inflicted pain, to one where the concept of individual rights began to take root. This is a common historical fact often taught in broad strokes, but its impact on the decline of public torture cannot be overstated. Yet, the concept of torture didn't simply disappear, it evolved. Methods became less public, more clandestine. The rack and the breaking wheel might have been dismantled, but the psychological pressures of forced confessions, the third degree in later centuries, and the enduring use of sleep deprivation or extreme stress and interrogation show that the spirit of torment persisted, albeit in different guises. The lines between harsh interrogation and torture continued, and still continue, to be debated. For instance, historians still debate whether certain enhanced interrogation techniques used in more recent history constitute a return to the principles of ancient torture, albeit without the overt machinery. This academic discourse highlights the enduring complexity of defining torture and its place in society. Consider the role of the evolving legal systems. As societies moved from arbitrary rule to more codified laws, the reliance on confessions obtained under torture gradually diminished. Evidence began to hold more sway than forced admissions. The idea of due process, of a right to a fair trial, slowly gained ground, pushing torture into the shadows, deeming it barbaric and ineffective. This wasn't a sudden awakening, but a slow, arduous process of societal and legal reform. Influenced by philosophical thought and changing moral landscapes, a little-known fact is that many of the infamous torture devices, particularly the more elaborate ones like the Iron Maiden, actually gained significant notoriety in the 19th century. During a period of intense public fascination with the macabre aspects of the Middle Ages, museums and traveling shows would often create or heavily embellish these devices, presenting them as authentic historical artifacts. This sensationalism contributed to their enduring popular image. Even if their actual historical prevalence was less dramatic, it's a fascinating example of how history can be shaped by later interpretations and desires for thrilling narratives. The legacy of ancient torture, then, is not just one of pain and suffering, but also a testament to humanity's ongoing struggle with morality, justice, and the boundaries of power. We look back at these devices with horror, yet their existence reminds us of a time when the human body was considered merely a vessel for punishment, a canvas for demonstrating authority. The slow fading of these brutal practices into history marks a significant, though imperfect, stride in human civilization. It speaks to a gradual, often painful, recognition of universal human dignity, even if that recognition is still a work in progress in many parts of the world. As you step away from these historical shadows, you carry with you not just the grim knowledge of what was, but also a profound appreciation for the progress that has been made. The world today, for all its imperfections, is largely one where such overt, systematic physical torment is condemned, a chilling echo rather than a present reality. The sounds of agony have diminished, replaced by the soft hum of progress, a quiet testament to the slow, sometimes agonizing, march of human compassion